Hey there, Abby Keegan here, equine nutritionist, here with another ProElite Pro tip for you. It's important to pay attention to starch and sugar levels in your horse's diet because excess levels can cause a lot of different problems. We can see an increased incidence of colic. It can lead to laminitis in the horse. We can also have increased risk of gastric ulceration. On the flip side, though, we also want to have enough starch and sugar. So in a performance horse, we can actually see a decline in performance if we don't have enough starch and sugar coming into the diet. So while we don't want to have zero, that's not possible, by the way, we do want to make sure that we're controlling those levels and we're also having consistent levels coming into our horses. NSC stands for non-structural carbohydrates. The primary non-structural carbohydrates you'll find in any feed are dietary starch and sugar. So when you're talking with your equine nutritionist or your equine veterinarian, they may want to know the dietary starch and sugar that's in a particular feed and in the particular forage to calculate the NSC in the total diet. So often I hear horse owners really getting hung up around trying to find the lowest starch and sugar or NSC values in a feed. And reality is that for the majority of horses, they really don't need to go that low. They need controlled, consistent levels. So, finding a manufacturer with processes in place to make sure that those levels are being controlled and, monitoring ingredients and nutrient levels they supply and in their formulation process, that's pretty paramount. Now, on the flip side, if you've got a horse that truly has a metabolic disorder, let's say they have equine metabolic syndrome, then yes, we do want to go for those much lower controlled NSC levels or starch and sugar. And really that's when also it's going to make a big difference what's being provided in the hay as well. So, in general, we want to say for those types of horses, a general rule of thumb would be staying below, about 10% WSC plus starch, which is water soluble carbohydrates plus starch in the hay itself. And then in the feeds, staying below around that 15% number. There's actually no published requirements yet for dietary starch and sugar levels, but there are certainly a lot of different factors that you can take into account as you think about your own particular horse. One of those is certainly health considerations. If you have a horse that has some sort of a metabolic disorder, is prone to laminitis, those are the kinds of horses that we really should monitor, not only our feeds, but our forages as well and what they're consuming. Certainly the activity level. If you've got a performance horse that, is really exerting a maximal effort for longer periods of time, we certainly need to make sure we've got enough starch and sugar in the horse's diet. So we might want to go up into those little bit higher ranges in the particular feeds that we're choosing and even in the forages as well. Certainly age, as we think about feeding young growing horses, if you have a weanling, their hindgut isn't fully developed yet to best digest fiber. And so you might need to rely a little more on non-structural carbohydrates for their energy or calorie sources. And then the horse's character, if you've got one that's genetically a little bit more prone to be a bit anxious, then certainly having a more controlled level of starch and sugar in their diet may help as well. NSC levels, particularly sugar, can have huge fluctuation in hay and pasture. And they're incredibly important to pay attention to, particularly when we have these horses with metabolic disorders. We've really got to hone in and understand what's coming in the forage. So because forage is and should be the primary component and make up the bulk pounds, right, that you're feeding that horse. So when you look at the pounds of forage in the average diet, 20 pounds of forage versus, maybe 2 or 3 pounds or even 6, 7 pounds of a feed, there's a pretty big difference there in the impact that can have on a metabolic horse when it comes to NSC or non-structural carbohydrates. So we really should be measuring and monitoring those with horses with metabolic disorders. Now, when it comes to the performance horse, we love those higher NSC hays or forages. So when we have a hardworking, and I'm going to say quotes, normal performance horse, we actually would prefer to have those higher NSC levels in the forages. So it really depends on who we're feeding and what they're doing. Locating NSC or non-structured carbohydrate levels in a particular feed will vary by manufacturer. Some will simply provide it on their website, or you can give them a phone call, but be sure to always ask if the number you're provided is a minimum, if it's a maximum, or if it's an average NSC value that they're estimating is going to run in that particular product. With ProElite, we are actually adding an extra level of assurance. So we're not required to, but we've chosen to actually publish our dietary starch and sugar levels right on our feed tags. And in addition, we actually provide the maximum level. So it's not an estimate, it's not an average, but it's the absolute maximum it's being controlled that particular product would ever run at. So if you want to know the NSC level of any of those products, you simply would look at the packaging. You would add together the dietary starch and the sugar, and that's going to tell you the maximum level that would ever run in that particular feed.